Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo. At the end of last year's sailing season, I ran into a few issues with our diesel heater, so this week I'm going to go ahead and pull that apart and see if I can figure out what's going on with it. I guess we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. My diesel heater is an Espar D4, and it's identical to a D2 except a little bit bigger. So if you have a D2, you know, all the construction's the same, the parts are the same, the glow plugs are identical, the flame detect is identical, and it's just on the D4 the combustion chamber is a little bit bigger, it's got different gaskets. So there's some subtle differences, but a lot of the parts are exactly the same, and the construction's the same. So if you need to take apart a D2, this is exactly what it'll look like. It'll just be a little bit smaller. So a diesel heater is very straightforward. It's got an external pump. It feeds diesel fuel into it. Diesel fuel is very energy dense, and it burns a little bit of fuel and it creates a whole lot of heat. So the D4 on full blast consumes around 0.07 gallons per hour of diesel fuel. And I've had the inside of this heats the entire boat, so my boat is 35 feet, and I can have it even below in sub-zero weather. I can have the inside of the boat at 90 degrees, and this thing just performs beautifully. So it's they're brilliant, simple pieces of machinery. The first thing I did here was to remove the control box for the D4, and it's just held in place by one screw and one little pinch plastic connector, and it pulls right out. It's pretty straightforward. There are 4 wires that go into the control box. Actually, there's 5 if you include the external connector, but inside there are 4 wires. 2 come from the flame detect, 1 comes from the glow plug, and then 1 for the blower motor. And these connections are keyed. So they've got subtle grooves inside of all of those connectors that help you align them, and you can't put the wrong plug into the wrong socket. Now, that being said, I did take photos of it because the keys are maybe 2 or 3 millimeters wide, so they're very, very small keys, and this is a very lightweight plastic. So if you're ham-fisted like I am, it'd be easy to shove the wrong connector back in the wrong spot. So I handled this thing very gingerly and I wanted to make sure I got everything put back where it came from. So I took a couple of photos of it, which way the wires were oriented, and it went back together no problemo. The 4 connectors on the control box, they're just held in there by tension. You don't have to unscrew them or do anything. They just push in, or they just pull out and then push back in. And they do have O-ring seals that protects them from the environment. And once you have those 4 connectors removed, you can just go ahead and set the control box aside and start working on the rest of it. Now, the problem that I was having with the heater, at the end of last season, there were several times when it would be cool at night and I went to start it up and it actually wouldn't start up. A few times it took me 4 or 5 tries to get it to ignite, and when it did finally ignite, there was a lot of white smoke coming out of it. So I knew that was uncombusted diesel fuel that was being heated, but it didn't reach the ignition temperature. So the white smoke, if you ever see that coming out of your exhaust, that's a sign that something is going on inside. Now, I didn't know at the time what it was, and I assumed it was just a carbon buildup, and it kind of was, but I discovered something critical had happened inside of the heater. The next step in disassembly is to remove the glow plug. The glow plug does have a little black rubber boot that goes over the top of it. You just have to pry that loose and slide it down the wire. In the rebuild kit, so you can buy these parts, if you buy the parts from Espar, just to buy the glow plug and the tool to remove it, it's a slotted socket wrench. To buy that is $210. Now that's just the start of the parts that you might need to overhaul one of these. And that seemed a little ridiculous to me, so I did not go with the Espar parts. I went with a cheap knockoff kit from Amazon. And there are a lot of different kits for Espars on Amazon. They ranged in price from $28 up to $58, and I bought one of both because I was just kind of curious what the difference might be, the quality of the parts, and then I figured I'd have a backup set. And I actually ended up buying 4 kits in total because I thought originally that I had a D2, And then when I took this apart, I realized the gaskets were the wrong size. That's when I realized I actually had a D4. So brain fart there, you know. So I ended up with 4 of these kits, and there's no difference in Amazon between the $58 kit and the $28 kit. They come from China. They're identical. The gasket material is the same, and the gasket material is the same for the official gaskets that come from Espar. So I could tell no difference in the parts between the official Espar parts and the parts in the Chinese knockoff kit. And I didn't price out everything, but if you bought all of the individual parts, they don't have a kit from Espar to rebuild these. So if you bought all of the individual parts, the glow plug screen, the glow plug screen insertion tool, all of the gaskets, it would probably be somewhere around $300 to $320, where you can get the exact same thing. Well, at least I think they're the exact same thing. I guess I'll find out next year when I'm running this, if anything fails. But when you can get the same thing for $28, it's kind of stupid to spend $320. So anyway, if you want to know more about those kits, I can put a link to them down below. But anyway, so once you have the rubber boot removed from the glow plug, you just put the slotted. So the reason the socket needs to be slotted is to go around the wires. So you just put the wires in the slot, and then you can turn your glow plug out. Now this is not in there very tight. I just put a screwdriver in the socket, and it came right out. And I did not super tighten it when I put it back in. I just snugged it. After removing the glow plug, I took the entire heating unit out of its plastic housing. From there, I just stood it on its end and removed the blower motor, which is held in place by 4 screws. Right below the blower motor is the combustion chamber, and that is held in place by 4 screws. The fuel line does come in from underneath and wraps around the side of the heat exchanger and goes into the combustion chamber, and that is held in place by a little rubber boot, and that takes a little bit of force to slide it out. I was a little bit hesitant at first to remove the combustion chamber because I was getting some resistance, but if you grab the fuel line and slide it up, that rubber boot will come right out of the housing, and you can remove the entire combustion chamber. Between the combustion chamber and the heat exchanger, there is a gasket, and that was the source of my problems, but I hadn't figured that out yet. When I removed the combustion chamber from the heat exchanger housing, I was a little confused because I was expecting this thing to be caked in like 1/4 of an inch of carbon buildup, and it was shockingly clean. It looks discolored because, I mean, it's been burning diesel fuel for the last 4 years, but I mean, there's really not any buildup on it, so I was generally confused as to what the problem might be. As I took a look at the heat exchanger housing, I was staring right smack dab at the problem, but I didn't see it yet. I hadn't discovered the issue yet, but I'm going to go ahead and show you and tell you what it was, because the only shot of the incident before I discovered it is coming up now. If I had known this was the problem, I would have taken better shots of it, but the video is going to freeze on a photo, and that's going to show you the best shot of what the problem actually was. So the fuel line is coming in there into the combustion chamber. That's the solid metal line, and that comes in, and the threaded fitting where the fuel line goes into, that is where the glow plug screws into it. And unbeknownst to me at that point, covered by all of that carbon buildup is an actual hole, and that is an air hole where the combustion process, that air needs to come in through the hole so the fuel can ignite and the whole process can get started. Now, I didn't know that hole was there until I actually went outside and cleaned this up. So one of 2 things happened. Either too much fuel got into the chamber and it didn't combust and it backed up out of that air hole. I don't think that's the problem, because the fuel should have drained down into the combustion chamber. I don't think that was the cause. It may have been, but I'm not convinced. It's probably likely that it's 50-50, one of these two, and the gasket that goes between the combustion chamber and the heat exchanger housing, I didn't know this at the time either, because the gaskets for some reason have a graphic on it, so I didn't realize at the time that not all of those lines were graphics. It was actually cracked. So it was cracked quite a bit. It was cracked into about 10 to 12 pieces. Well, maybe not that many, maybe 8. But one of the cracks was located directly above the glow plug inlet. So either carbon came through the gasket and came down and covered the hole, or fuel backed up out of the hole and then burned and covered the air hole. So one of those two things happened. The combustion chamber, it was blackened a little bit on the back side where the gasket was, directly above that weep hole, or that air hole. So I don't know which one it was, and actually, you know, I guess logically it's probably more likely that fuel did back up out of that hole. Maybe. I don't know. You know, I'm not an expert on these things. I'm guessing those are the two most likely scenarios, so I didn't discover this until after I cleaned it. Disassembling this entire heater was a piece of cake. Everything came apart easy. Everything is super easy to manage. There's nothing hard here except for removing the glow plug screen. I'm not going to subject you to much of this torture, but removing that glow plug screen was a nightmare. Down inside of the hole where the glow plug screws in, there is a small mesh screen down there, and that has to be replaced. And to get it out is not easy. So some people have suggested using dental tools. I tried a very small screwdriver. I couldn't get anything down in there to get it out. Maybe if you had a small hook, it might have worked. If you had some very, very precision needle nose pliers, you might be able to get them in there. What I ended up doing was actually collapsing the screen down into the chamber, and I bunched it up into a ball, and then I went in with a drill, and I knew if I could drill into the mesh of the screen, it would snag on the drill bit, and then I could pull it out. And that's actually what ended up happening. So after taking the Lord's name in vain a few times, I finally got the screen out, and I would definitely get some sort of a dental tool next time, because it was a little touch and go there for a while. After finally getting the glow plug screen removed, it was time to take a little brake cleaner to the combustion chamber and get her cleaned up. And wouldn't you know it, that's when I discovered the air hole that I didn't know was there was plugged. And that's when revelations were had. Velvet robes parted, the skies cleared, the sun was out, birds were chirping, bread was broken, and a beer was enjoyed. Just when all was right with the world is when I discovered I actually had a D4, not a D2. I went to replace the gasket between the heat exchanger housing and the combustion chamber, and that's when I realized, hey, this gasket's way too small, what's going on? So I took a look at my serial numbers and the information on the housing, and I'm like, oh, you dumbass, you've got a D4, not a D2. So then I ordered the correct gaskets so I could get her put back together. And it wasn't until this point I actually for half a second considered reusing that gasket, because I didn't know yet that it was cracked. And then I looked at it even closer and I saw all of the cracks, and I knew I couldn't reuse it. It would have been bad to reuse it anyway, but that might have just caused the problem to start again, or to, you know, return if I had used it. So I always use new gaskets. Just a couple of quick comments and one extra thought. I did replace all of the gaskets and the glow plug screen, but I did not replace the glow plug itself. Glow plugs last almost forever, so I didn't really see any reason to replace it. There was no visible damage to it, so I assumed it was working fine and just reused it. Also, I did not remove the flame detect from the heat exchanger housing. You can remove it, but there again, there was no reason to remove it. It did not affect the disassembly of the unit, so I left it in. One other thing is, the more I think about it, I almost wonder if the glow plug screen itself wasn't the problem. If fuel or if carbon built up on the glow plug screen, it is possible that that fuel could have backed up through the air hole right above or right below the glow plug and right above the fuel inlet line. So I almost kind of wonder in retrospect if the glow plug screen wasn't the problem. So I'm guessing it was one of those three. The more I think about it, the more I've almost essentially eliminated the gasket as a potential problem, even though it was cracked. The more I watch this video, there are no signs on the back side of the combustion chamber. Even though it was a little blackened, it would have taken significantly more carbon to go through the gasket to block off that hole. So I don't think the gasket was broken, but I don't think that was the cause of the issue. I think it was actually most likely the glow plug screen was causing fuel to back up, which then combusted improperly and created gum, which blocked the air hole. That's all I'm going to say about that. And I'm not going to force you to watch too much of the beached whale that I am contort myself as I crawl into a very small hole to reattach the heater upside down and all of its control and fuel and exhaust lines. So let's get beyond this. Kids, don't fall in love with beer. It's evil. After I got everything put back together, it was time for a quick test. She fired right up, first try, no white smoke, perfect heat, life is good. And that's all we have time for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't make these videos. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotton, Peter Allen, and Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. Your support really means the world to me. I do have one legacy patron member, and her name is Joan Linbo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of extra videos and photos of our travels, and I try and keep everything there up to date and post at least once or twice a week, so it gives you a little peek behind the curtain. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That'll help us out more than you'll ever know, and that actually doesn't cost you anything, so hit that like button. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.